an Earth-based space company. It's space travel for, it's a Starlink, and maybe Moon or Mars if we're lucky. That's like after we get Starship to work, but we're not really going beyond that. And so like, I
You would.
Fuck yeah. I'm not trying to like gratuitous. Yeah,
Right.
I care about this country. I think like as fucked up as it is, and like as all the issues that we were talking about as far as macroeconomic headwinds and whatever, I want this thing this weird experiment to continue. I think it's a beautiful place to live. And if somebody was like, yeah, like some of that stuff you talked about, it's extremely low cost, thermonuclear 2.0 thing, like don't talk about it. I'd be like, yeah, I'm not going to talk about it. But like what's interesting is like I actually feel like I've become very close to truths in certain areas, and like it's just sort
like
of
where?
Have you seen my Townsend Brown episode?
No.
Oh,
Is that the guy who the 26-year-old engineer?
No. This guy is a mid-century inventor. He's born in 1905, died in 1985. And he worked with like most of the kind of big aerospace companies. And then you have like all of these really interesting, credible witnesses around gravity experiments that he did with these asymmetric capacitors. So you have a negative charge plate, positive charge plate, neutral insulator in the middle. You pump the whole thing with kind of like megavolt range electricity, and you get this weird, this acceleration from the negative plate to the positive plate, even when the positive plate is faced upwards. So it's basically like ability to manipulate gravity through pure electromagnetism as the input. And, that would be this insane novel thing. And he claimed to replicate it in a vacuum chamber, which is like the main detraction on this experiment is that ion wind is causing the thrust. So if you're in a vacuum chamber, you don't have ion wind. There are other variations of the experiment that involve negating the ion wind component. And like Edward Teller was a credible witness. I've met Townsend Brown's daughter, who talks about Edward Teller being in the room, freaking out around, saying, I don't know how this works, around Townsend Brown's fan precipitator experiment. You have this technical consultant at Wright-Patterson, or Wright Airfield at the time, named Victor Bertrandius, freaking out. You have Agnew Bonson, who forms the Institute of Field Physics and is funding Brown, but also doing funding the most frontier theoretical physics at the time and establishing quantum gravity. He says strange things happen at high megavoltage across short distances. He's clearly talking about Brown's experiments. And then the interesting way in which this ties into the UFO story is like that magnesium bismuth, we talked about in the Gary Nolan thing. So magnesium bismuth is this thing that Brown talks constantly about because it's a high K dielectric, meaning it stores a lot of electromagnetic charge. The higher the K factor on the material and the insulator in between the two capacitors, the greater the thrust you get. And so barium titanate, magnesium bismuth, a lot of these materials that come up, in this interesting way around the UFO conversation are part of Brown's experiments and are in his like Winter Haven proposal. And so that could make you a cynic, and you could be like, oh, that's like, maybe it's all like cover for some gravity thing or whatever. But Brown himself was very trippy, and he would talk about being in touch with space brothers. And like
Space Brothers.
Yes. And like he and his daughter had a UFO experience. And he attributes a lot of his initial work and knowledge to a UFO experience he had on Catalina Island, which is a UFO hotspot.
The fucking Catalina wine mixer.
That it all started there.
It is a UFO. I just can never wrap my head around the fact that the Catalina wine mixer place is where there's a lot of UFO shit, but you're 100% right.
It's Somehow those two things go hand in hand. Yeah. So, and there's a good book called Undersea UFO Base by Preston Dennett, which documents all the crazy amount of UFO sightings in Catalina. So anyways, that would be an area where like that really wasn't super popular, the Brown stuff pre me cover. I mean, this great biographist guy named Paul Shatskin wrote a book on it called The Man Who Mastered Gravity. And that, my piece was in some ways an homage to that book. And I think there are all sorts of loose threads in areas where I've gone deeper on the book, and like I think there are weak areas of where we need more corroboration. I think he gets certain things wrong in spots, but if Townsend Brown, in the world in which UFOs are real, if you're telling me Townsend Brown wasn't part of the, kind of legacy stuff, then I just don't believe then I think UFOs aren't real or something. It's like he has to be more involved than anybody, in my opinion.
But you're also saying in some of the research related to that, to bring it back to the beginning, you could be getting at some things that get a little interesting.
Well, yeah, because it's like if, and how in my interview with Hal Puthoff and Weinstein, Hal Puthoff's like, if we figured anything out in the maybe we did figure out some of the stuff in the world of gravity, but it went black. Or we didn't figure anything out. And he kind of like proposes these like funny, sort of thing. And if we did figure anything out, I think Brown was at the center of it. There might have been alternative, some other interesting things being researched, like microwave beam propulsion. There might be a couple of other, kind of ways to investigate this, but I think Brown was pretty, deep on this stuff.
But if you got hit up that some of these threads were getting close to national security, you're saying you'd back off.
Yeah. I mean, if I got, good rationale for it's like, hey man, like you don't want like, yeah, that, but the reason to not back off until that is that like, this has really important civil side, like our infrastructure's in decay. Our cities are like, it's horrible. They suck. And going downhill despite $1 trillion infrastructure bills being passed. And we're not an interstellar, species. And, it would be awesome if we could and actually transcend the limits of SpaceX, which SpaceX is an amazing company, but it's really an Earth-based space company. It's space travel for, it's a Starlink and, maybe Moon or Mars if we're lucky. That's like after we get Starship to work, but we're not really going beyond that. And so like, I think this stuff is extremely important to explore. And so, yeah, until like I hear anything on that, then I think the logical thing is like move forward.
And I respect that a lot. I also respect the idea that like, as a patriotic American, if you felt like something was getting on the edge of where shit could get dangerous or there's blowback, you stop. Here's the catch-22 there, though, that's difficult. And my friend Joby Warwick, who I've had on a couple times, episode 134 and episode 198, he's two-time Pulitzer winner, long-time national security reporter at the Washington Post, just incredible journalist.
Yeah.
Wrote the book Black Flags in 2015 or 2016, which is about like the rise of ISIS and is the greatest book ever written on that, which won the Pulitzer. But like, I remember when he was in here for 134, when I was still in my parents' house, there was a conversation maybe like 50 minutes into there where we were talking about all the scenarios where what you're talking about happens exactly in the Washington Post room, in the national security room. And it is where their sources or representatives of the government come to them when they're working on a story they know about and they go, yo guys, if you report this, people are going to die.
The other problem that you might encounter at the end of this is something we actually get into all the time, is even after you've proved your case 6 ways to Sunday and no one can really deny it, you still have this sort of final interview with the CIA in which you're presenting what you're going to say, because they have every response. As we see it, they have they should be able to respond and say what they want to say. And often they will make an appeal to you as an American saying that if you write this story, you're going to get somebody in trouble, you're going to get somebody killed. And then it gives us pause, and we stop and we think, well, is that really true, or are they just kind of feeding us this line because they're going to be embarrassed? And often we'll negotiate. We'll say, okay, well, if there is a security issue, if there is a person at risk, we're willing to withhold certain facts. We're willing to, and that's a difficult decision for a journalist to make, but we see that as being responsible, that you don't just say something or report something because you know it. There's also, you do worry about human lives. And if you're going to compromise a security operation, we're not comfortable doing that. And so we'll modify the report in a way just to leave out certain details that might get somebody in trouble. And the one example where that's happened was the black site prisons that we talked about. There was a secret CIA program where they set up prisons around the world for interrogating members of Al-Qaeda that they caught. And it was a top secret thing. Nobody knew that these prisons existed. It was outside to the judicial system. There's no accountability, no oversight.
What years are we talking about?
This was 2005 and 6 was when the stories broke.
Got it.
And so the initial stories that we wrote, we knew where the prisons were, but we agreed in a negotiating process with the agency that we wouldn't say specifically where they were because there would be possibility of attacks on those facilities. You know, there was real danger for people if we pointed to specific facilities. So we left that out, and it was still a powerful story. We still revealed something we felt was very important for people to know about.
Yeah.
But we tried to do it in a responsible way, and that's just sort of the balancing act that we have to do sometimes.
And he talks about the impossible meeting that occurs there afterwards, where they have to ask themselves, do we believe them? Or do we think they're trying to cover for something and people aren't really going to die and they're trying to hold the dangle of human life over us so that we don't report this?
Yeah.
So if you start getting at some things that get really interesting, you know, I'm with you, and it's an impossible question to answer in your head that, like, there may be points where you stop. But you might have to ask the question sometimes where it's like, who's telling me this and why?
Yeah.
And maybe this is sketch.
Sure. Well, if they're doing it to protect oligopolistic interests or whatever, then I would just say the context in which you're operating as an oligopoly on, you know, whatever science or tech or whatever is going to go away because the U.S. is going to lose its kind of primacy in these areas. And so again, in the world in which you have, you know, some sort of arms race around this stuff, which is sort of, it's really dystopian even to like talk about and like frame it like that, but it's the world we live in. And if Carl Nell, again, is right that there is this sort of reverse engineering arms race, then you have the U.S. version, which according to everybody in UFO world has this corporatized, balkanized, fiefdom-based, left hand's not talking to the right hand, if you believe this Wilson memo thing that came out, you know, where this guy, head of the, you know, J2 Joint Chiefs, Thomas Wilson, who's, you know, in charge of all military technology, is meeting with Eric Davis and, you know, saying that he's meeting with this company and progress is very slow and cumbersome and they exist outside of, you know, all normal, you know, security clearances. And, you know, they kind of understand some aspects of how these crafts fly, but they don't understand all of it or whatever. If you believe that, and if you believe, you know, Lockheed, Northrop, like all these sorts of companies like have like bits and pieces and they're not coordinating with each other, then you have to think that like the Russia-China version, it's just like fully nationalized and they just have like their best and brightest scientists on this stuff.
Good point.
And if that's the case, it's like maybe we're cavemen and we have USB drives and the caveman has no idea what to do with the USB drive. You don't know information theory. You don't have a computer to plug it into. But maybe it's like Galileo with an iPhone, which like that Galileo's pretty smart. And maybe Galileo can open up the iPhone. The iPhone has a graphical interface. You can kind of touch it and like learn, you know, this action causes this reaction. And all of a sudden, you know, convergence as far as like ability to like use the thing gets much quicker. And like these, I have to like make these conjectures because I have no idea. Yeah. And nobody has any idea. But like to my knowledge, unless I'm living in some like Truman show, the smartest people I know like work at like, I don't know, like Anduril and Palantir and SpaceX and like, you know, these like new tech companies. They're not working at these older, stodgier, you know, like American primes. They're just not. You don't go to work at Boeing if you're like some super smart.
Allegedly.
What's that?
Allegedly.
I don't know how it works if it's being done like that covertly, you know. It's like the secrecy must be like so good, you know. And so like assuming like that mental model is correct, then like it's in a lot of these people's best interests to actually start to like share this stuff and like get in front of the topic. And I think that's been happening. And I think that explains actually a lot of the last, you know, 7 years of disclosure. But I think it's not maybe happening fast enough or, you know, these companies aren't coordinating well enough. And so I think you just have to ask yourself that question. Is this, are you being hushed because of like, you know, pure profit or whatever? But I'm skeptical of the idea that these things like are profit centers now. You know, I think in the world in which, again, these companies have like craft, I don't think we like understand fully how they fly. I think there are like real challenges to like working them fully. That would be my guess.
It also doesn't just have to be profit, though. There can be other variables that we could go on long tangents about that perhaps for stupid reasons they're just like, oh, the public can't know about that. And like, again, it comes down to a judgment call. And I don't envy that position. As far as I know,
no, I don't either.
I've never been in that position for. I don't think I have.
No, they were told by the CIA to like do the bidding. To like you guys are like our plausible deniability as the U.S. government for being involved in this stuff. I think a lot of them are patriotic people, and then I do think probably white collar crimes have like occurred, but like the core like crash retrieval stuff. I don't know how you do it differently in retrospect. Like, I don't know, and again, this is all based on these kind of hypotheticals, but like, I could see, a lot of the just basic core legacy program and like hiding that being somewhat forgivable. And then I think a lot of, the fuckery like around, psyops and stuff and driving certain people crazy and, that marginalizing people based on their experience, like all that's horrible.
Yeah, it's terrible.
Yeah. And that should be, addressed in like in a real way.
And that's also something your boy Grush bravely, I think, brought up. And that's a really, that stuff bothers me. That people's families should not be brought into these things and shit like that. Thank you for watching the video, guys. If you haven't already subscribed, please smash that subscribe button and check out this clip's full podcast episode by clicking here or in the description below.